So let's begin. We are also live on Facebook. Some people are still joining us, but I think it is time to begin. The day is full of contributions, and so good morning, everyone. We are glad to see that the roundtable has attracted significant interest from the scientific and non-scientific public. This event is not a conference, but rather a discussion on a topic that we believe is becoming increasingly crucial in reconstructing the scenario of Italy at the dawn of history. We believe that the position of the Rhaetian and the Tyrsenic linguistic family may also have consequences in the definition of the population dynamics in a more significant part of the Paleo-Europe. The roundtable will take place in 2 phases and 3 sessions. In the morning, 10 scholars will speak briefly in 2 sessions. The papers have been arranged so that they proceed geographically from the Rhaetian focus outwards, thus reaching Campania and then Lemnos with the last papers of the morning. We thought to start with the genetic aspects, since a study on the Etruscan paleogenome has been published on Science Today. In the afternoon, in the 3rd session, there will be a roundtable discussion. Many colleagues are invited to make a short intervention and ask questions. Everyone can contribute to the discussion with suggestions and reflections. So I will share the screen. Okay. This event aims not to answer questions, but to ask the right questions, bringing the disciplines together in effective and productive dialogue. All too often, the supposed multidisciplinarity turns out to be a dialogue between the deaf. Sometimes the prejudice of superiority of the disciplines prevents all point of view from being considered at the discussion table, seeking a shared synthesis. We hope that this will be the beginning of a lasting collaboration. We hope that the disciplines will continue to talk from tomorrow. These changes with some colleagues in preparation for this day have already revealed surprising shared views. Most of the presentations will be in English to facilitate maximum communication between scholars from different countries and languages. I ask all colleagues to speak clearly and not too quickly so that the audience can follow. The event, we remind you, is also broadcast on the Alteritas Facebook page. Enjoy the Rhaeti Co Day. In the last 8 years, the Rhetic language has known a great new season of interest. 2 epigraphic corpora, one printed, the Monumenta Linguae Rheticae, one online, Thesaurus Inscriptionum Rheticarum, a dozen papers, 1 book, La Lamina di Dempfel, 2013, 1 booklet of the I Love series some years ago, the Mnemon page devoted to the Rhetic language, have been dedicated to this relatively small yet very significant language in the framework of the ancient European languages. Why is Rhaetian, with its less than 400 descriptions, essential for the construction of ancient Europe? Because, as Helmut Rix already explained in 1998, Rhaetisch und Etruskisch, and later Stefan Schumacher and Carlo De Simone confirmed, this fragmentary language is a sister of the most known Etruscan, one of the 3 languages of the so-called Tyrsenic language family, to which also the language of the Lemnos inscription in North Aegeus belongs. The main features of this language in respect to the other 2 sisters languages are at phonology graphemic level, in a symmetry vowel system with the merge of the whole sounds to the velar U. Only the grapheme U is attested, Y, Lack of graphemes for the sounded series of the plosive, only te, ke, and pe are attested. Opposition of spirants, different graphemes for the realization of postdental S and palatal S. At the morphological level, the agglutinating morphology on the right, the correspondence of suffixes for the dative, pertinentive, genitive, and locative, suffixes, two suffixes for the plural, ra and va. Recently, I have added the spircuva, tuluva, stuva words to this second va, the plural suffix. In the verbal system, the suffixes ke and he for the preteritum. In the verb nomina postverbalia in ku or ku, with ka or ku, q. In the onomastics, the binomial formula with pronomen and na patronymic. The Ittic pronouns, such as the Etruscan ka, eka, Rhaetic, ka. In 2013, in one chapter of the book entitled The Lamina di Dempfeld, the bronze plate found by Gerhard Tomedi's team, the Innsbruck University in Dempfeld, Austria, I propose a possible branching of the languages, considering the Etruscan Rhetic split very ancient, while the Etruscan Lemnian separation much later in history. In red, possible proposals of the split, which I propose now, and they were not yet in the early chapter in 2013. The linguistic evidence invites us to consider aspects of relative chronology between Etruscan and Rhetic, and between the Tyrsenic language family and the other languages of ancient Italy. Let's briefly recall the chronological items from this evidence. First of all, Rhetic doesn't present the postonic drop of non-stressed syllables, the so-called syncope, while Etruscan does, starting with the 5th century BC and even earlier. This feature also characterizes some Italic languages and deserves further analysis, as will be sketched later by Paolo Poccetti. Second, the Rhetic presents a simple onomastic system in which only two formulas are known, as we said, the masculine with pronomen and nu patronymic, and the feminine with pronomen and na patronymic. Etruscan, on the contrary, shows evidence of a structured personal name repertoire already at the beginning of the epigraphic documentation, characterized by gentle names built with many suffixes, some of them borrowed from the Latin Italic system. Third, Rhetic presents no motion suffix used in Etruscan to build the feminine personal names from the masculine ones. Etruscan present the so-called motion suffix already in the most ancient inscriptions of the 7th century BC. Be this suffix the borrowing of the Indo-European motion, scarcely attested in the Latin Italic languages, or the most common E genitive used in the onomastic formula, such as in marci fili. This feature does not affect the Rhetic language. And fourth, surprisingly, we are to the fourth, new relevant information comes from in-depth analysis of the personal name repertoire of the two languages, which share the same roots independently developed in each language. These names are not simply Etruscan personal names adapted to the Rhetic language. They present independent developments starting from the same lexical heritage. Since we know that most anthroponyms rely on common nouns, which lost their semantic shallowness during the centuries, the personal names of the two languages have been created starting from the same lexicon. All these speak for some linguistic landmarks, which imply chronological consideration. Etruscan innovates in respect to Rhetic, which represent the most ancient item in the Tyrsenic language family. Secondly, the separation between the two languages must have happened deep in time, as scarce traces of lexicon can be recognized, at least with the records now available. Differently behave Lemnian, as even in the few documents presents content words similar to the Etruscan ones. And thirdly, the Etruscans has been exposed to the Latin Italic languages after its separation from Rhaetian. This exposition has caused the admixture of suffixes, personal names repertoire, and a few other features which have led to what in 2007, I proposed to call a macro-ethnos. The above presented scenario invites us to ask some questions, such as, when did the split between Rhaetian and Etruscan take place? Why or by whom were Rhaeti and Etruscan kept apart in northern central Italy? Who was settled first in northern and central Italy, Etruscan or the Latin Italic group? What is the place that Lemnian evidence can assume in the reconstructed scenario? We hope those questions will better define today. As I said above, we are not looking for definitive answers, but we can start to put the right questions on the when and on the how the outlined prehistoric scenario has formed. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Simona. I will start now my presentation, and I will share the screen. You have to habilitate me.
Edit.
Okay. So here I am. Thank you very much. So even if we started here with a linguistic discussion, as Simona highlighted, we have indeed a multidisciplinary series of presentations, obviously including language studies, but spanning from archaeology to history and genetics and much more. That is, apart linguists, scholars primarily working on material sources, telling us of continuity in occupation and practices, hinting at continuity or change that is archaeologists will present, or people working on, scholars working on written sources, telling us about the ancient writers' informations and opinions about the past societies, that is historians, and scholars were working on biomolecular materials, telling us about genetic relations. And we also have physical anthropologists attending, working on individual mobility, and other specialists as well. We believed that different fields of evidence, as Simona has already said, should be brought together in order to check the evidence from multiple points of view and to find new lines for the future research. In fact, the language, the evidence from which we are starting, is a communication system. And sorry, I move this aside. Communication system and the code embedded in the inculturated in the individuals, an important tool and evidence of ethnicization, but it is not necessarily coincident with ethnic identity, even if it is an important part of it. In fact, language transmission is not the simple reflection of migration and endemic diffusion, but also a more complex phenomenon of kinship groups, matrimonial exchange, communication and power, bottom-up and top-down processes, even if the movement of people is the most evident case for language expansion. We also want to stress that language is a strong tool of power and of official agency in developed societies. Language and ancient DNA are likely linked, but they are not exactly two facets of the same phenomenon, as language change in presence of a migration depends also on the composition of the final speaking population and on their internal power and ritual relationships. Is a new language necessarily replacing the extant one, which was spoken by a great part of the joint final population, or would the former extant language prevail or hybridize? To get better solutions, we need to use the bucket of tools of different disciplines, trying to highlight also contradictions to the easygoing solutions. So the starting point, in historic times, that is, let's say, the very end of the 6th century BCE, linguists recognize affinity between two non-Indo-European languages, one Alpine, the Rhetic, the green area here, and the other in central Italy, the Etruscans, and developing also in part of the northern Po plain. And furthermore, the Alpine one, as we have just heard, would reflect an older phase of development. That is, the Etruscan would have developed farther after a split. Where did these languages come from? It is well known that two different theses have alternated in their favor in Italy. Etruscans were seen as autochthonous people or as an immigrant people. And this alternative was already in the opinions of ancient historians. Herodotus, in the 5th century BCE, proposed the immigration from Lydia, modern Turkey. While other sources substantially agree with Herodotus, Dionysius of Halicarnassus in the 1st century BCE reports an Etruscan significant informant telling that Etruscans were autochthonous people. The Lemnian evidence, of which Simona has already spoken, is a strong part of this discussion, as Lemnos was indeed quoted also by the ancient historians as a place connected to Etruscans. Around 2010, many relevant scholars in Italy gave credit to the Eastern migration hypothesis during the final Bronze Age or the early Iron Age, contradicting the dominant Italian opinion of a local origin, rooted in Massimo Palottino's writings dating to around the Second World War. We can see that the migration hypothesis is, in this case, coincident with the growing attention given by the scientific community for migration issues after year 2000, issues which were largely forgotten for so many years after the Second World War. But here we are focusing on Rhaetians. And could they and the Etruscan come from elsewhere? Is there any archaeological discontinuity that could imply a radical language change? Livy, in the 1st century BCE, said that Rhaetians were Etruscans of the Po plain who escaped into the mountains at the arrival of the Celts between the 5th and the 4th century BCE. But is there a discontinuity in cultural development in the Alps that can account for this movement? Or should we think that the Rhetic-speaking populations were already living in the Alps? So, obviously, we have many different situations since the beginning of the Neolithic, and many Italian scholars also working on DNA, for example, Barbuiani, have also suggested that the existence of the Etruscan groups in Italy since a very long time, maybe even before Neolithic times. But the point is that in the early Neolithic, when the dramatic change in the DNA composition took place around Europe, largely due to the different demographic potential of the groups bearing Neolithic economy, northeastern Italy could have been a meeting point between the Mediterranean seaborne cultural aspects of Impresso culture and the land-borne cultural aspects developing into the Starcevo complex and the linear band ceramic later in Central Europe. And Neolithization in the Alps is a complex phenomenon that scholars argued implied contact and exchange with Mesolithic populations. We are waiting for new data from the Neolithic DNA of the Alpine valleys and particularly of the Adige Valley, but the traditional attitude of the scholars was to assume a strong interaction and continuity with local Mesolithic groups. And anyway, Neolithization and Neolithic periods see also different directions in the movement of cultural traits around Italy. For instance, in the later Neolithic, we have varying influences with the development of a direction of influx of the Western chassis aspect toward the east and south until central Italy during the 4th millennium BCE. So we have changing directions, possible different connections, and even movement of people. So when the impact of the now well-known and significant steppe migration around 3000 BCE was recognized, anyway, so far, the evidence seems to be apparently rather delayed and not that strong in northern Italy. In any case, cultural aspects show a certain archaeological homogeneity across northern Italy in the Copper and Early Bronze Age. It is during the later part of the Early Bronze Age that we can see the presence of Eastern materials in the Po Plain linked with the Vergata-Wieselburg group. When the paper by Hack and colleagues came out, there was an analysis also of the components in the genetic data from different modern populations. And you can see for the case of the Tuscans, the rather high percentage that was at this time attributed to some Anatolian connections typical of the early Neolithic, which could be also part of a discussion. But obviously today, just exactly today, we will have many other new data coming out in official papers to discuss better in the future. This is the case for the insertion of Eastern archaeological materials at around the second part of the early Bronze Age, which link the area of the Vergata-Wieselburg culture to the northern Italy in the Po Plain. After this period, the Middle Bronze Age development of the multicultural group of the Terra Mare in the middle of the Po Plain inserts a new different cultural element. And in this moment, we have the infill of the plain with evidence cultural archaeological materials apparently taking their development from the surrounding groups. And indeed, at the very end of the Bronze Age, between the recent, what we call in Italy, recent Bronze Age and the final Bronze Age, we have the development in the Alpine area of the Laugen-Melaun group that definitely defines a proper communication area inside the Alps. And I'm certain that Franco Marzatico will shortly quote this situation. This distribution that you can see with the green areas just foresees the future development of the Rhetic communities as we know them associated with the San Zeno group. It has to be remarked that this period of specific growth of an internal community of the Trentino and more generally Alpine area is also connected with an intense exploitation of copper mines that makes this area particularly relevant in the international trade of metal during the Bronze Age. And this is again what happens at the beginning of the Iron Age or during the Iron Age. That is the green different groups that are linked to the Rhetic writings, and the blue ones, which are the Indo-European speaking Lepontic and Venetic areas, and the red one, which is the Etruscan area. Afterwards, we will have the Celtic intrusion, and all the Po Plain will become, let's say, blue in terms of language. So, therefore, were the affinities between the Alps and Central Italy a very ancient fact, dating maybe to the Neolithic, or was the early Middle Bronze Age a last phase of relative unity, after which only segregation between the Alps and Central Italy could develop? Well, Franco Marzatico obviously will come and speak about this, and I want now to remind another aspect of our series of presentations. As we are speaking of the Rhetic communities and their communities living in the Alps, it is relevant also to discuss different cultural aspects that link together the populations during the Iron Age, just to see what could be the situation of connectivity during this later period. And in this period, in the period during the later Iron Age that we see here from the half of the 7th century to the 400 BCE, more or less, we can refer also to an important iconographic document, that is the Situla art, an iconographic language that presents interesting links between different areas, and it is a hint at the populations whose language we are discussing and whose interactions we wish to consider. The great importance of this art is in the representation of real rituals and life scenes in a descriptive and accurate way. Sitular art is diffused, as I said, mostly between 650 and 400 BCE. This is an almost a triangular area spanning from the Picenum southwards to the lakes of Lombardy toward west and to the Dolenisca eastwards. It is born in Bologna, defined by historians as the main Etruscan town of northern Italy in this period, but possibly also a multi-ethnic center. The diffusion of this art is anyway non-Etruscan. As you can see, it does not occur inside Etruria proper, the red area, but only in the Padanian Etruria, the faint red area. And here you can see it better, the division between the proper area and the faint red area of the Padanian Etruria. The group of the sitular art is internally subdivided in many different archaeological groups, historical peoples, and spoken languages. It is an international iconographic medium. In any case, we have an extremely significant indication. We have the same lifestyles, same ceremonies, same competitions, same uses, and same dress. Maybe different hats, but expressing the same kind of social hierarchy. This is crucial, most of all, the fact that we see the same social hierarchy, and both among Venetians, Rhaetians, Illyrians, Istrians, and so on. Very important for a discussion of Indo-European traditions, we guess, is that in most of the area, the horse sacrifice was practiced, and it is a peculiar sacrifice following the Indo-European tradition, that is killing one horse of a chariot, often the race-winning chariot, with a pair or a triple set of horses. And the sacrifice was done with a spear, like in Rome, which is not in the map now here, as reported by ancient sources about the October Equus sacrifice, and like in Bologna via Belle Arti excavation, top left, where there is a horse with a spear head buried together, or as reproduced over the Magdalenska Gora situla that you can see on the right top in the slide, the killer of a horse going with the spear toward the sacrifice. And horses were sacrificed also during the honors to single persons, as for war winners, as in the Situla Benvenuti that you see on the bottom right side. Therefore, in this phase, where we could expect radically different situations, the framework is anyway contradictory, pointing to a not simple entanglement of situations. We have groups from the Padanian Etruscans, we have groups from the Rhaetians, from the Venetians, all having the same sitular art and some common and shared features and uses. In fact, the Certosa situla, one of the oldest vases of the series from Bologna, is the only sitular art item displaying another powerful ritual, typical of Italic-speaking populations, but also somehow of Etruscans. The ritual is already quoted in the Odyssey, but we can see here the first known representation of a suove taurilia, which is the killing of a bull, a mutton, and a pork together for the ritual. This will remain the main sacrifice of Rome from the Republican times to the imperial ages. So, although differences in language were in existence, communication and parallelism in elite structure and somehow in rituals was in action. And possibly there was also some stratification of rituals, maybe the horse sacrifice being more ancient than the tradition of the killing of bull, mutton, and pork. So at this point, after this introduction that we did together with my colleagues Simona and Luca, we stop here, just having given some of the elements for the future discussion. That is, the main problem is if these connections between the Rhetic and the Etruscan language are correct, when did they come to be partitioned? Did they arrive later? Did they arrive earlier? And what is the relation with the Indo-European languages around? And what can also iconography, uses, rituals and ceremonies and social structure tell us about those complex populations. Thank you very much, and I give you back the line. Simona will lead, I guess, the first
thank
part of the day.
Thank you, Alessandro. Thank you very much. And so let's move on with the first speech of the day. So David Caramelli and Cosimo Post, recent genome analysis on Etruscans. I think Cosimo was speaking.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
please.
Great. Yeah, thanks a lot for the opportunity to present today these new results really about to come out. And I would like to ask you, if possible, I don't know if someone used Twitter or, or other media, please not to tweet yet until the embargo lifts. But of course, we are online in Facebook. So it's great to give more visibility to this study. Today, as Simona mentioned, I'm going to present together with David Caramelli, and I'm going to give the presentation, but then of course at the end, both me and David, we're happy to answer any question. I'm Cosimo Post, Junior Professor for Archaeo and Paleogenetics at the University of Tübingen, whereas David Caramelli is the head and professor of molecular anthropology at the University of Florence. Okay, let's get started with this presentation. So I would like to start here by highlighting one aspect that of a review that I wrote last year together with a colleague, Inigo Lalde, where we plotted all published ancient genome from West Eurasia, including both Europe and the Near East, until mid-2020. We are talking about around 2,000 genomes, ancient genomes. By now, in only 1 year more, in 2021, September, we are, I think, already over 3,000. So genome published. So this picture is not completely updated, but just to show here how the vast majority of genome-wide data from ancient individuals published so far comes from a time span between 8,500 and 3,000 BP in order to capture very important cultural transformation, for example, the advent of Neolithic as well as the advent of the Bronze Age. But as you can see, there is way less genetic data from older time period, possibly because there are limited amount of human remains to be studied, but there is still a fewer amount of data also from younger time periods, so younger than 3,000 years ago, from the Iron Age onwards. And this is, of course, something that now is changing. There will be multiple studies where focusing on these later time periods, where obviously there is a wealth of archaeological, historical, as well as skeletal remains. If you see how these in ancient genomes younger than 3,000 years before present are scattered across Europe, here this is the map, and they are divided in different time slices. And I would like today in the introduction, because I think it's important also to the Etruscan and Rhaetian question, to focus on two areas where genome-wide data has been previously published. One is the Iberian Peninsula, and the other one is the ancient city of Rome and its surrounding. So let's start with Rome. In 2019, maybe you're all aware of this great study, Antonio et al. In Science, where they reported a time transit through the city of Rome and also its surrounding, spanning between the Mesolithic until modern time. And in this principal component analysis here on the right, what the authors could show very clearly that there is two major genomic transformation. The first one is from Mesolithic hunter-gatherer to Neolithic and Copper Age farmers. And then a second one into Iron Age and later time periods. However, if you pay attention, we actually see that Iron Age individuals from Rome and its surrounding are mostly clustering in a quite dense cluster, let's say cloud, whereas population from later time period from the imperial period onwards are actually shifted significantly towards the Near Eastern population. Okay, so we see indeed a shift between Neolithic and Copper Age to the Iron Age, clearly with the acquisition of what was mentioned by Alessandro Vanzetti as this step ancestry. But this is not the end of the story. There is clearly another substantial genetic shift towards the Near East, at least by the start of the imperial period. If we move to Iberia, we see somehow a very similar pattern, and this is quite interesting because here in a publication from Olalde 2019, the authors report the arrival of the steppe ancestry, here represented in yellow, from at least 2500 BC, that influenced all Iberia, including the Basque country. But what I want to point the attention here to is that at least by the Roman period, there is a new influence arriving into Iberia from ultimately related to North Africa and the Near East, again shifting the gene pool of Iberian population from the Iron Age to modern day times towards the Near Eastern population. Again, this shift is very substantial and influence all the population in Iberia, except of the Basque country that, as I mentioned before, does carry steppe ancestry, but it remained very similar to Iron Age population present across Iberia. And here we go to our data sets in Etruria. I will today present only a subset of the entire data set that is composed by over 80 genomes, mainly focused in the core of Etruria, here represented in kind of dark orange. And we investigated 12 archaeological sites in Tuscany and northern Lazio. I don't need to introduce the Etruscans here to you. This public, I guess, knows very well the culture and you know, their language. But if we look at in the temporal time frame, we can identify two major temporal intervals. One spanning between 800 and 1 BCE, spanning over the Iron Age and Roman Republic period. And the other one, I also want to give you some insights on the Roman imperial period up to 500 CE, to see the shift, possible genetic shift before and after year 1. So what are the research questions for our study, or at least for this presentation? Of course, what are the genetic origins of population associated with Etruscan culture? As Alessandro mentioned, there is this big kind of two opposing scenarios, in a way actually quite distant from each other, autochthonous development versus an Anatolian or Lydian, let's say, birthplace. We also wanted to understand what are the genetic interaction within Etruria over the first millennium BCE. And then we are interested to understand if there is a genetic impact from connected to the Roman Empire. So as usual, we start with a principal component analysis, here representing in gray dots modern day genomic variation, so present day people from West Eurasia. And I marked here in kind of color circle present day Italian population. So in blue, we have individuals from today Southern Italy and Sicily. We have in pink modern day Tuscans, and in blue we have North Italians. Okay, and on the corner of this PCA, I plotted ancient individuals that represent kind of the cornerstone of the genetic variation observed in West Eurasia. Moving into the genetic placement of first millennium BCE individuals from Etruria, represented here by diamonds, we see that most of the individuals, over 40 individuals, actually plot quite tightly together here in red. But there are also some substantial outliers again, in this time frame, in the first millennium BC, individuals that shifted more towards North African ancestry, some individuals that are shifted more towards Northwestern European ancestry, and then also one individual that is shifted towards the Caucasus or Near Eastern ancestry. We try to model these groups, this cluster that we identified, using this cornerstone of genetic variation. And we were able to model Etruscans, associated individuals from the main cluster, as a combination between Anatolian Neolithic ancestry, Western hunter-gatherer ancestry, and Yamnaya, let's say, steppe ancestry. Okay, the other cluster, for example, the one shifted towards Africa, required additional genomic components on top of the three I just mentioned, including an ancestry related to Iranian Neolithic farmers, as well as an ancestry related to Moroccan early Neolithic individuals. So what is the take-home message of this first PCA and analysis? That despite the sporadic presence of individuals of likely Near Eastern, African, and Central European origins, the Etruscan-related gene pool remained homogeneous for almost 800 years, spanning our time transect between 800 and 1 BC. If we now focus on this red cluster, I move to the next slide. So the core of the genomic ancestry observed in Etruscan-associated individuals, we observe that they overlap with most of the individuals dated to the Iron Age and Republic period from the city of Rome, published in Antonio 2019. And equally to those individuals, Etruscans share a high proportion of steppe-related ancestry that, as has been discussed before, has been linked to the spread of some Indo-European languages across Europe. So, assuming that Etruscan, of course, this is an assumption that we would like to discuss with you, is a language that predates the spread of those Bronze Age expansion, this is one of the rare examples of language continuity, despite a substantial population replacement with steppe ancestry up to 50% if we use Germany-Bell-Beaker as a source of this steppe ancestry. And we propose, we actually more than propose, we speculate that one explanation for this pattern could be a prolonged period of admixture that took place during the Bronze Age between steppe ancestry and local population. But of course, we will need Bronze Age individuals to test this hypothesis. I want to just add one detail about what happens after. So in the first millennium CE, with the start of the Roman imperial period, we observe a marked shift towards the Near Eastern ancestry, very similar to what observed also in the ancient city of Rome. And this replaced large portion of the Etruscan-related genetic profile during the Roman imperial period. We also looked at the uniparental markers, mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome, before and after, so in the first millennium BCE and then the first millennium CE. And while the mitochondrial DNA frequency of haplogroups remains more or less constant between these two time frames, we observed a marked shift in Y chromosome haplogroup frequency, indicating the importance contribution in male mobility in the genetic turnover in the imperial period onwards. We cannot exclude a female contribution, but certainly there was a substantial shift due to male mobility with the turn of the millennium. So just to summarize our findings with some kind of graphical summary, Etruscan associated individuals do carry a substantial proportion of steppe-related ancestry that most likely arrived in Italy with the Bronze Age. Despite the presence of ancestry related to the Near East, Northern Africa, and Central Europe in the Iron Age and the Roman Republic period, the genetic gene pool, the genetic landscape of the Etruscan related individuals remain homogeneous for at least 800 years. And then we identify a substantial genetic shift, up to 50%, from ancestry related to the Near East. We model them as Levant or Anatolian ancestry, arriving into Europe, into Italy, and shifting this ancestry, and potentially also explaining why, connecting to Alessandro comments, why Toscan's population have been identified based on modern day studies, genetic study, with a very high proportion of Anatolian ancestry. But this is up for the discussion, of course. So I would like to ask, first of all, of course, you for your attention, and in particular the two collaborations that were very involved in the study, Valentina Zaro and Maria Spiru, from the Max Planck Institute and University of Tübingen and University of Florence, Johannes Krause as senior author on this study, and David Caramelli, that of course is here with us for the contribution, but also to all the collaborators that took part in this study. And I know that some of them are also here in the audience, so for sure they can contribute in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cosimo. So very interesting, very intriguing for our later discussion in the afternoon. Please, if you have flash questions, so clarifications, something like that, please, you can speak now, and otherwise we move to the next presentation. So bigger discussion is left to the afternoon session, as you know, but somehow if one wants to ask something more, he didn't understand, he can do it now. Any questions? No, okay.
I was too clear.
Okay, it was very clear. Thank you, Cosimo.
Thank you.
Let's move to the next presentation from Franco Marzatico, Continuità o cesura, i reti dal punto di vista archeologico, autoctoni o discendenti dagli Etruschi. Franco?
Hello. Firstly, I want to thank you and Alessandro Vanzetti for the kind invitation, and now I prepare to share my Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Very
So,
well.
So I want to point out especially one thing. There is a big debate regarding the Rhaetic people, and the Rhaetic people has many connections with the other people living around the Alps. And there was, and you see there are in the different times, span of times, some relationship with some relationships with a different level of connection between the half of 6th century BC until the 4th. We have a very big connection with the Etruscan people, but it's impossible to say that the Rhaetic people were directly descended from Etruscan, because if we can see the different materials we have found in all the Alps, and also the different way of life. Firstly, thinking also at the different model of settlement, because in the Alps we didn't know, for example, the urban phenomenon. We can see that there are connections, but these connections are especially in the frame of the acculturation. So I want to underline that for a long time there was a very big discussion about the nature of the Rhaeti, if they were really people or a cultural or only a cultural group. And until the discovery of the two inscriptions of the Sebastian of Aphrodisia, where is written the word Rhaeton ethnos, until this discovery in 1970 years, there was a big discussion with also theoretical problems regarding the classification of this cultural group. And of course, the arguments are very debated, like identity, alterity, border, and of course, we have an archaeological approach, and there is some anthropological studies, like the studies of Bettini, that think that the word identity is very dangerous. But if we see the different idea of the contacts and mobility and the use of objects, for example, for the after the presence of the big connection with the Etruscan, Italic, Mediterranean world, we have a big connection with the Celtic world, and in this regard, there is the use of weapons of the winner, like the swords. But speaking rapidly, and of course, I want to, I beg your pardon for my English, but I had to prepare in these few weeks many meeting, because all the people thought that with September we were more free than before from COVID. But if we see the extent, the localization, and if we combine information from written sources with archaeological data, we can conclude that the Rhaeti were settled on both of the sides of the Alps, and in an area that largely overlaps with the area of the development of the Frisian San-Zeno culture. Here it's possible to sign on the basis of the reference of geographical points the area of the Rhetic people. And as we have already seen in the Alessandro slide, we have the possibility to fix in the map the position of these people. And there is a very, very interesting overlaps between the informations of the written sources with the archaeological data, and especially when seeing the very typical products like ceramics or other kind of materials. And of course, we have also regional differences, for example, with this kind of jokes that is very interesting for the connection with another group, the group of Valcamonica. But if we see, it's very impressive how there is a particularity in this area where we recognize the so-called Frisian San-Zeno or Rhetic culture. You see the knives, you see some instrument connected with the fireplace, for example, or especially for the agricultural works that are typical without, this is very interesting, without precedent attestations. And also with the houses, we have the possibility to fix in the map the same area. And on the ideological point of view, the warships with the so-called Brandopferplätze, the fire, the votive fire, it's possible also to see a very big concentrations in this area. And this kind of warships, it's very interesting, begin from the Middle Bronze Age. And, but in some cases, we have also the continuity between the Copper Age and early Bronze Age until the Roman period, the first century after that. So it's very interesting because it's difficult to think that it was a big immigration or movement of people when we have the continuity in these sites and the presence of the same local potteries or objects. And it's well known the map of the inscription that confirm this area like a specific area that has a connection, a very interesting connection with the Luco-Laugen culture of the end late Bronze Age. This culture has a continuity with the presence of with the Rhetic culture, as is possible to see, especially seeing the jugs that a big tradition, and this kind of jugs is frequent in the worship, and some authors think that this kind of jugs has a big connection with the ideological and religious ideas. And for example, this Stollner, Tecchiati, and other authors wrote this. So it's interesting to see that the Inn Valley in Austria was out of this common area during the end and the late Bronze Age, and after we have the culture between the past and behind the archaeological data that unequivocally, without doubt, refute the descent of the Etruscan, the Rhetic from the Etruscan. The question of the ethnic and genetic dynamics of the Alpine populations remain open. The relationship between Frit and San Zeno culture, you see in the picture, it's very interesting in relation with the Luco-Laugen culture, because maybe as in the rest of northern Italy, for example, for Veneti, Gola Secca, and Celts, Villanova, in the Eastern Alps, we can presume that some ethnic dynamics began at the end of the late Bronze Age, when the Luco-Laugen tradition began. This is in accord with was written about the ethnogenetic dynamics at the end of the Bronze Age. But of course, if we see the best connection with Etruscan, we can recognize that there is a different dynamics in the world of the connection between Rhetic, Alpine people, and Mediterranean people and Celts people, because at the beginning of this cultural group, very particular and very easily recognizable, we have the use of many objects connected with the symposium, wine, and ceremony, and we saw with the Alessandro Vanzetti slides the importance of the iconography in the so-called arte delle situle. And if we see what came from Po Valley or from the Mediterranean area, we can see we have some objects connected with the life of the aristocratic world, and of course also the beginning of the representation of the warriors and with the so-called heroics and athletics ideal. And when the world changed with the coming of the Celts and Galli in the Po Valley, we can see that this area continues to use some products of Etruscan area, but change the kind of ornaments, but in this case, not using importation, but with a reinventation of the models of the Celts, with a very big regional production. And it's convincing, the idea that we have here a model of acculturation, and maybe we have a model of acculturation also between the relationship with Rhetic, Frisian Zeno culture, and and Etruscan. And you see, sorry, and you see we have the continuing of the circulation of goods, of prestige in this area, but there is of course a new world and also a big changement and an interruption in the 4th century of a lot of settlements. So maybe if the Etruscan came with a migration inside of the Alps, we probably had to see some interruptions, some new apport in the warships and the settlements. And during the 4th century, we see the interruption of the settlements, probably with the instability connected with the migration of the Celts. And for the Romanization, it's very interesting because it is very similar, the process like we saw in the during the formation of Rhetic Frisian Zeno culture, because also in this period, during the 1st century BC, we see that there is wine, there is the symposium, there is the life of the aristocracy that begin to use the different shapes, the different model of the Mediterranean area. So maybe we have to follow this way, and of course we know also the presence at Rubiera of and so-called Rhetic person, but we have for this problem to have to see with the big problem that we have few tomes to study, to see how connect the Mediterranean world with the Alps, thinking that there was an imitation of the life of wife, as we saw perfectly with the Situra art, for example. So sorry for my bad English, I finished.
Thank you, Franco. It was very interesting, and so many input, many argument on what to discuss then later. I would like, is there any flash question for this?
I would, as I guess that Franco will not be with us this afternoon, so I would like only to make a couple of questions. One is more than a question, is a statement. You said that the graves are few because unfortunately the cremation is the dominant ritual in the older part of the Iron Age, and definitely we miss the bodies in the Alps, isn't it?
Yes, it's right. We have, but it's not only a reason connected with the cremation, but we have really few cemeteries. Cemeteries, and for example, we know that some people of the Alps, of the Rhetic Frisian Zeno culture, went to work at the Durenberg mine of salt, because there we found some graves with potteries coming from Alps, typical pottery coming from Alps. And so the problem is to also to see in the graves if there are foreign men.
And other things, sorry, Franco, but it is also important. You quoted that since the late Bronze Age, we see a strong continuity, but you quoted also some continuity from before, from the Copper Age, in terms of the cultic activities.
In some worship, yes, we have in many cases in Valley, in Trentino, for example, at the Campineri of Claes, and in other sites, where there is a very long tradition. And on the other side, we have also between the Luco-Laugen culture and of the late and first Iron Age and the Fritz and Sanzeno culture of the second Iron Age, also an interruption, because the new houses are really something that was not known before. Yes, we have a tradition of a building with the use of stone and wood, but Lunz, for example, thought that the new model of the house, so-called the Rhaetic or Alpine houses, was brought from the Etruscan world.
We had a short question, a flash question from Gianfranco Chiai. He asked if we have Celtic names attested in the Rhetic inscription. I have already answers, but if you wanted to tell something about this, Franco.
No, no, the expert are you, but only to add these things. It's very interesting for me, the presence of Taranis, so-called the Taranis.
Ah, yes, the Tarani, yeah, I forgot it. Yeah, the god Tarani, yes.
In Flenstein, in Valle di Fiemme.
Yes, yes.
Okay, many thanks for your answer. Very, very interesting paper, really. Many thanks.
Okay, then thank you, Franco, and I hope you will remain for the next question in the morning, for the next speeches in the morning. I would move to Maramiglia Vacca, approaching to a comparative analysis of Rhetic domestic spaces, some methodological remarks.
Okay.
You can share your screen.
Yes, can you see?
And Franco, you can interrupt, probably you can interrupt your presentation. Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Because I cannot see you. Anyway.
Please.
Oh yeah, now. As already underlined by Franco Marzatico, the problem we are dealing with, the origin of Alpine and Etruscan population, is relating to different sources: archaeological, epigraphic, linguistic, literary, genetic. As archaeologist, I would like to remember that an archaeological culture is not a racial group, nor a historical tribe, nor a linguistic group. It is simply an archaeological culture. I'm quoting David Clark. So we should not expect these things to correlate completely. My contribution is concerned with the remains of the building used during the Iron Age in the Eastern Alps, and a possible comparison with the Etruscan world. We must underline that a building is the product of a series of natural, functional, and cultural factors that modify each other in a systemic context. Two factors, climate and topography, are fixed by natural conditions and are very important in primitive archaeological context. Available materials, level of technology, economic resources can be defined as flexible factors. Although they often depend on natural factors, their manipulation depends on cultural factors. Finally, function and social conventions are considered cultural factors. We can assume these two factors as fixed when studying contemporary houses within the same primitive or vernacular social context. The culturally fixed factors are the most important determinants of architectural form and use. And of course, we should look to these factors for a comparative study of domestic architecture, but are often the least recognizable in the remains of the distant past. While topography, climate, and available materials are recognizable and help the archaeologists in fully understanding the incomplete archaeological remains, the remains themselves should help in defining the cultural conventions which did not survive archaeologically. Therefore, a major difficulty archaeologists have to face when studying architectural remains is decoding the cultural fixed factors. The Rhetic houses are located in the mountain environment of Eastern Alps, where the range of available building materials, stone and wood, thatch and turf, is very easily recognized. The choice of stone and of wood depends also on the level of technology, and the builders of the Rhetic houses were able to choose the best available material in their environment. Sedimentary rocks and oak in the southern area, igneous rocks and softwoods in the northern area. Sunken floors have long been considered a major feature of the Rhetic house, but looking at the available data, there are many surface-built structures in all the Rhetic area. Common features to these surface buildings are the small dimensions and the probable non-dwelling function. By far, the largest number of Rhetic buildings are those with sunken floors, but outside the geographical region occupied by Rhaeti, sunken floors occur in mountain environment at Montevide and at Como, suggesting that the significance of the sunken floor was not only cultural. Climatic and topographic factors could provide an explanation, as sunken floors protect by the wind and low temperatures. In a mountain environment, sunken houses provide cellars very suitable for the preservation of foods. As for the house size and form, the earliest and most common type used in the Eastern Alps is the rectangular dwelling with an area of 20 to 40 square meters. This type was already present in the Etruscan world at the very beginning of the Iron Age in the Villanovan period. The village of Monterozzi has a rectangular hut with an area of 35 square meters, together with oval huts with an area of 80 square meters. A difference explained in terms of nuclear families living in the smaller rectangular houses and extended families living in the larger oval ones. Following this interpretation, we could argue that the presence of several larger houses in the northern part of the Rhetic area indicates the persistence of extended families into the 4th, 2nd centuries BC, while nuclear families seem to be more probable in Veneto. If we broaden the comparison, though, it is evident that the issue is not so simple and that it could be also a matter of different functions of these two house sizes. In Slovenia, the village of Postela, dating at the end of 7th, beginning of 6th century BC, shows rectangular houses covering the whole range of dimensions of the Rhetic houses, with a greater variety in the size of the houses than the Rhetic villages do. The same happens in the later Iron Age at Como, belonging to the Golaseca culture. On the other hand, in a mountain position in the Apennines, the settlement of Montevide, dating to the 4th, 3rd century BC, show houses with small and homogeneous inner areas of 20 square meters. In the contemporary settlements in the Po Plain, there is a striking homogeneity of house dimensions and the lack of the small buildings we find in the mountains. In the Etruscan site of Forcello, the houses are rectangular, divided into internal rooms with an area of 60-70 square meters, as it happens at Padua and at Spina. The Po Plain buildings are anyway far from the very large, complex constructions found at Marzabotto, where many rooms cluster around an internal courtyard. The partition dividing the internal space into various rooms first appeared in Etruria in the 9th, 8th centuries BC, while rectangular buildings with larger areas from 60 to 130 square meters and an internal partition similar to the type found in the northern part of the Rhetic area during the 3rd, 2nd centuries BC appear in Etruria in the 7th century BC. At San Giovenale, not far from Cere, the houses are small and square, sometimes added to one another laterally in a way reminiscent of many Rhetic situations. The data seem to indicate that the organization of inner space always came later in the Alpine region than in Etruria. The Mottata construction, that is unique among the Rhetic houses so far, dates to the 5th century BC, but is comparable to the large rock-cut tombs at Cere, Tomba Mengarelli, Tomba della Nave, Tomba degli Animali, 7th century BC, divided in 3 zones by 2 rooms of columns and covered by a false beam sustaining the central column. The presence of an entrance passage seems a typical feature of the Rhetic houses and could be particularly influenced by cultural conventions, although, of course, it may also be related to climate, as the form and the dimensions of the entrance passage vary according to what seem to be geographical variables. The small straight entrance passage is distributed especially in the southern part of the Rhetic area. In the Trentino region and further south, the entrance passage parallel to one side of the building is present, while complex angled entrance passages occur especially in the northern part of the Rhetic area, emphasizing the architectural barrier controlling access into the interior of the construction. These entrance passages could suggest the isolation of the building as an autonomous entity and social and political instability. No easy parallels may be drawn for them. Looking for entrance passages comparable to the Rhetic ones, they are not present at all at Postela and Nasoci in Slovenia, while at Como only the Recinti, the largest buildings of the settlement, had a wide straight entrance passage where a cart could get through, leading to the ground floor used as a storage place. The dwelling plan found at Verrucchio, 5th century BC, shows a narrow, long-built space parallel to the long side of the building, which has been interpreted as the remains of an open porch. It is reminiscent of the entrance passage parallel to one side of the building found in Trentino and Veneto. We might imagine open porches built on stone foundation, perhaps at San Zeno. In Etruria, at Acquarossa, from the end of the 7th century BC, there is a type of dwelling with different rooms, all facing a front entrance passage, which Colonna has considered a vestibule used for entertainment. It is something new for Etruscan architecture and the ancestor both of the Verrucchio open porch and before that of the so-called vestibule tomba della Casetta, discovered at the Cere and in the area around Viterbo, dating to the first half of the 6th century BC. These are considered the funerary counterpart of the atrium house, which became standard in archaic dwellings of central Italy. Of course, there was a development from the still rectangular vestibule at Acquarossa to the squared atria of the Cere tombs. In this development, the atrium became the main part of the house, onto which all the other rooms opened. Something very different from the Rhetic entrance passages, which, on the basis of the dimensions, position, and connection to the wall dwelling, were simply passage areas intended to help the internal temperature and the privacy of the dwelling. In conclusion, nor the choice of building materials nor the sunken floors seem to be very useful to our inquiry, while both house size and forms and the entrance passages could suggest something about cultural conventions and should be more deeply investigated to clarify the relationships among Alpine and Etruscan populations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mara. Since Mara will not attend the afternoon session because she is called to another event in Fiave, please, if you have questions to Mara, put them now.
Well, I could ask one thing anyway. So, Mara, what do you think about precisely this fact of the the similarities with some features of the Gola Secca culture? Because there we are, you said already, but I wanted you to remark this.
Well, there are some similarities that you see we should more deeply investigate to see something, to say something really good. These similarities are the sunken floors, for example, which are present both in Gola Secca culture and in the Rhetic culture. But the sunken floors are a feature which is typical of the mountain environment, and it seems to be it seems very much depending on the climate and topography, and on the necessity of storing food for the winter. I say another time again that the house are very informative, but they share a lot of influences, cultural, social, topographical, climatic, and it is not easy to understand which is the influence, what is cultural, what is not. Or
Yes, there is a comment by Thomas Reitmeier about storing cheese and dry meat in the cellars for the winter. And I guess there was a question by Tomedi.
Gerard Tomedi.
Gerard Tomedi.
Gerard, did you raise the hand for your... We can see you, Gerard.
Sorry.
Okay.
I just wanted to say to Mara that we have excavated a house in Stams. We finished the work in 2018, and we could observe the stool of the roof, of the construction of the roof. And we found a special type of masonry.
Yes.
Which shows that the roof had a degree of about 55 grades, which is very steep. But maybe the room up there would be able to store hay.
Yes, yes.
It would also be a very good mean for isolation against the frost.
Yeah, it is very interesting because I think that the roof, the form of the roof should be one of the more informative feature of the house. But unfortunately, roofs survive very
rarely.
Very never survive, more or less. And so some features of the roof, as Gerard said, in the alpine zone are the steepy, that they are very steep because they have to carry the snow. And also because there is some spare room to store food, as Gerard said. Yes, I agree with you, Gerard.
So, if there are not any other questions, thank you very much, Mara. And I have shared the PDF on the sources, the literary sources of the next speaker. I invite Elvira Migliario to speak. Welcome and thank you, Elvira.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you to Simona Marchesini, che ringrazio per aver organizzato questo incontro, per avermi invitata. Mi scuso ancora con lei e con tutti gli intervenuti perché ho un concomitante impegno accademico che mi costringe a limitare i tempi della mia partecipazione e quindi a perdere gran parte degli interventi della giornata. Le riflessioni molto sintetiche che vado a sottoporre alla vostra attenzione riguardano appunto le informazioni che le fonti letterarie, storiografiche ed etnogeografiche greco-romane hanno tramandato sui reti. È un corpus minimo di pochissime notizie, la cui scarsità e avarizia sono inversamente proporzionali alla grande quantità di studi che ne hanno trattato. Ovviamente di queste fonti non intendo proporre alcuna lettura innovativa, ma invitare a una riconsiderazione nel quadro dei rispettivi contesti cronologici e soprattutto storico-culturali di riferimento.
Scusa Elvira, posso condividere il testo in inglese che mi hai mandato?
Che è un testo ovviamente sintetizzato, ma trattandosi di commento di fonti preferivo mantenere l'agio. Grazie.
Perfetto.
E poi ti chiederò di passare l'allegato delle fonti stesse.
Sì, quello l'ho già messo nella chat.
Grazie molte. Posso andare allora? Oggi siamo generalmente concordi nel considerare la cultura di Fritz-Sanzeno come l'espressione materiale delle popolazioni retiche o almeno di buona parte di loro. Questa convinzione si basa sulla corrispondenza tra una buona porzione dell'area in cui le fonti greco-romane ci consentono di collocare i reti, pure con tutte le incertezze e le contraddizioni che sappiamo, corrispondenza fra appunto quest'area e il territorio interessato dalla cultura di Fritz-Sanzeno. Premetto che il mio riferimento scientifico sono i lavori di Franco Marzatico, che saluto perché ho visto che partecipa. Ora, in effetti, l'areale in cui si è sviluppata la cultura di Fritz-Sanzeno risulta compreso appunto nel territorio che le fonti assegnano ai reti e che dovrebbe corrispondere a entrambi i versanti del settore alpino centro-orientale, anche se noi sappiamo che secondo alcuni questa identificazione è data tutt'altro che come pacifica e il problema dell'identificazione sembrerebbe ancora aperto. Tuttavia, ciò che si propone di considerare a sfavore di questa identificazione, cioè l'assenza dei reti dall'iscrizione di Laturbie, che fa parte delle fonti nel mio handout, non appare dirimente. Non appare dirimente perché reti era probabilmente un nome collettivo che in quanto tale raccoglieva più sottogruppi. E in effetti, lo sappiamo, Plinio a 333 li dice in multas civitates divisi. Tuttavia, bisogna tenere conto del fatto che civitates indica delle entità istituzionalmente riconoscibili nel linguaggio tecnico-giuridico delle istituzioni romane, riconoscibili perché oramai strutturate civicamente, il che ci rimanda a un orizzonte cronologico non anteriore all'età augustea e impedisce di riferire la notizia a una situazione pre- o protostorica, per la quale Plinio avrebbe usato un altro termine, avrebbe usato gentes, e cioè propriamente gruppi etnici a organizzazione tribale non ancora giunti a quello stadio strutturale pre-civico che implicava l'esistenza di una comunità dotata di un proprio territorio delimitato, ma soprattutto fornita di strutture di governo e di una classe dirigente riconosciuta e legittimata dalla potenza dominante. Il diverso significato di gens e civitas è chiaramente evidenziato nella stessa iscrizione di Laturbie, dove i popoli delle Alpi sconfitti da Augusto sono definiti appunto gentes alpinae devictae. Tra queste, aggiunge significativamente Plinio, in fondo a 338, non sono comprese le civitates cottianae. Sarebbero le comunità valligiane stanziate sui due versanti del Monginevro, soggette a quel capo locale che si chiamava Cottio, e che furono coinvolte nel trattato da lui siglato con Roma nel 13 a.C. E Plinio dice non lo sono neanche le civitates attribute ai vari municipia dopo la Lex Pompeia dell'89 a.C. Quindi è chiarissimo che per essere civitas bisogna avere determinati requisiti che non possiamo applicare a una fase pre- o protostorica. Resta ovviamente verosimile che le civitates in cui Plinio sapeva che i reti erano suddivisi riproducessero o rifunzionalizzassero strutturazioni etnico-cantonali più antiche e che dunque almeno alcune delle civitates retiche del I secolo a.C. corrispondessero a gentes precedenti. Di fatto una lettura attenta della notizia pliniana ci mostra che la nostra fonte deve essere valutata nel contesto storico-culturale che l'ha prodotta e non appiattita in un unicum cronologico insieme ad altre testimonianze eterogenee e che i nostri autori attingevano, lo sappiamo, a loro volta fonti a documenti precedenti di cui talvolta si limitavano a una riproduzione, più spesso a un'interpretazione, a un adattamento alla realtà in cui essi vivevano. Prima di andare a considerare più da vicino le altre nostre fonti, partendo da quelle più antiche, è d'obbligo un'ulteriore premessa metodologica che ci impone di valutare quale fosse il livello delle conoscenze che la cultura greco-romana aveva effettivamente delle popolazioni alpine. Nell'orizzonte pressoché esclusivamente mediterraneo, proprio dei viaggi di esplorazione greci, che avvenivano lungo rotte marittime i cui approdi costieri solo raramente prevedevano di spingersi più nell'entroterra, la conoscenza dei luoghi interni poteva basarsi solo su notizie scarse e frammentarie, ed è il motivo per cui le Alpi furono a lungo un'entità sconosciuta da collocare nell'orizzonte del mito, come indica l'associazione di Ercole con i valichi alpini occidentali che sono inseriti nel racconto delle sue fatiche. Il mondo alpino è rimasto escluso anche dall'enorme ampliamento di conoscenze prodotto dalle spedizioni di Alessandro Magno e pertanto ha continuato a essere ignorato nonostante il grande sviluppo del sapere geografico di età ellenistica, cosa che invece non avvenne per le grandi catene asiatiche, innanzitutto per il Tauro e il Caucaso, perché erano diventate centrali nelle dinamiche strategico-politiche della storia ellenistico-romana. L'estraneità della cultura ellenistica alle Alpi e ai loro abitanti emerge in tutta evidenza dalla descrizione che ce ne dà Polibio nel secondo libro delle sue storie, 2, 14, 6, 7 e 8, 10. Le storie di Polibio furono composte negli anni 30 e 20 del secondo secolo a.C., quindi fra il 130 e il 120. In Polibio la catena alpina segna il limite, l'orizzonte geografico e visivo della pianura padana, che invece era oramai ben nota perché entrata nell'orbita romana dopo le guerre galliche della fine del III secolo a.C. ed era interessata da un enorme, grandioso processo di colonizzazione. Però per Polibio le Alpi restano appunto un'entità lontana e per nulla appetibile, date le proibitive condizioni geoambientali che le rendono, secondo lui, del tutto inadatte all'antropizzazione. Informazioni più precise sulle Alpi e sui loro abitanti iniziano a prodursi e a diffondersi solo vari decenni dopo, a partire dal I secolo a.C. E soprattutto il turning point sono state le spedizioni di Cesare in Gallia, che prevedevano e implicavano una frequenza enorme, inedita, del passaggio degli eserciti attraverso le Alpi. Quindi è allora che la percorribilità e l'attraversamento dei passi alpini diventa una priorità. Polibio però risulta disporre di qualche dato minimo, almeno riguardo ai valichi. Sempre parliamo dei valichi, è quello che interessa. I valichi maggiori, infatti ne cita 4. Il passo è tramandato da Strabone ed è il primo di quelli che ho elencato nello handout. Se voi fate attenzione, questi 4 passi sono considerati da una prospettiva padana, cioè Polibio è nell'Italia settentrionale e considera da lì le Alpi. Cosa nomina infatti? Le popolazioni del versante alpino italiano attraverso i cui territori bisognava passare per salire ai valichi. Attenzione, quando leggiamo a volte questa notizia tralaticcia, si dice il tale valico è nel territorio della tale popolazione, non è vero. A tale valico si accede attraversando il territorio di quella popolazione, di A, dice chiaramente Polibio. E chi cita? I Liguri, attraverso cui bisogna passare per valicare le Alpi marittime, i Taurini per le Alpi Cozie, e lui dice da lì era sceso Annibale, i Salassi per le Alpi Pennine e i Reti perché attraverso il territorio dei Reti si giungeva a Resia, al passo del Resia. I primi 3 valichi non a caso davano accesso a parte della Gallia transalpina, l'unica con cui i greci avevano una buona dimestichezza, seppure limitata all'orbita commerciale delle loro colonie sulla costa, innanzitutto e soprattutto Marsiglia. Quanto al 4° valico, l'unico orientale citato, poiché lo si raggiungeva risalendo la valle dell'Adige, la sua menzione costituisce, quella sì, una prova certa dell'esistenza di una popolazione stanziata sul versante alpino italiano che nel II secolo a.C. era nota con l'etnonimo di Rhaetoi o Rhaeti. Un'informazione la cui origine va presumibilmente cercata nel mondo veneto, che confinava con quello retico-atesino, e che era ben noto a Polibio per i suoi legami risalenti con Roma, legami che erano stati formalizzati almeno dal 225 a.C. con il celebre trattato romano-veneto, di cui lo stesso Polibio ci dà notizia nel secondo libro delle sue storie. In ordine cronologico, le menzioni dei reti successive alla testimonianza polibiana, che, lo ribadisco, costituisce la più antica attestazione della reticità come entità etnica della Valle dell'Adige, sono di Pompeo Trogo e di Livio, i quali all'incirca contemporanei, perché probabilmente attivi tutti e due in età augustea, concordano nell'attribuire ai reti un'origine etrusca. Ora, si tratta evidentemente di una costruzione tardiva, non ne abbiamo tracce precedenti, e di origine erudita, almeno per quanto riguarda Pompeo Trogo, e basata su stereotipi ampiamente collaudati nella mitografia greca, come indica l'invenzione di Retus quale leader eponimo. Invece, per quanto riguarda Livio, come è stato già ben inteso da Franco Marzatico, l'etnogenesi etrusca dei reti fu forse originata dal ricordo, probabilmente ancora vivo nel Veneto del I secolo a.C., in cui Livio Patavino si era formato, ricordo della dispersione degli Etruschi provocata dalle invasioni galliche del V-IV secolo a.C., ma anche probabilmente dalla consapevolezza del ruolo che gli Etruschi avevano avuto quali promotori dell'alfabetizzazione del mondo veneto e prealpino centro-orientale. Sappiamo che tutti nel nord-est hanno imparato a scrivere dagli Etruschi, ma anche come parlanti, i Reti e gli Etruschi ugualmente, di lingue avvertite entrambe come estranee, o almeno che tali dovevano risultare a un orecchio veneto nel I secolo a.C. È significativa la prudenza in proposito di Plinio, che era di Como, in un territorio dunque che confinava con la provincia di Rezia. Plinio riporta la notizia dell'origine etrusca dei Reti e cita la figura di Retus, ma li pone nel campo delle opinioni non documentabili con l'arbitrantur, il verbo arbitrantur. La presunta derivazione dei Reti dagli Etruschi appare dunque come il prodotto di un'operazione erudita e abbastanza tardiva, propria di una tradizione antiquaria molto ben studiata, che noi sappiamo rifiorì in età augustea, privilegiando il filone dell'origine e della storia dei popoli dell'Italia romana, che era diventata l'Italia di Augusto. Di origine non antiquaria invece, ma più senz'altro storiografico-memorialistica, sono le notizie dei reti che forniscono gli autori di età imperiale, e nell'ordine Strabone, Velleio, Patercolo e Cassiodione, che è il più tardo, scrivendo agli inizi del III secolo. Di costoro, Velleio si limita a una narrazione sintetica della guerra del 15 a.C., mirante a esaltare le capacità militari di Tiberio, a cui l'opera è dedicata, amplificando la pericolosità dei nemici Reti e Vindelici. Attenzione, Reti e Vindelici che appaiono sempre appaiati nelle fonti d'età imperiale. Cassiodione a sua volta riprende il tema già proprio di Strabone della legittimità della guerra retica, imposta dalla necessità di neutralizzare continui attacchi e incursioni nel territorio dei Romani e dei loro alleati. Anche questa è un motivo che conosciamo benissimo, perché vale a giustificare le guerre alpine come bella iusta, cioè motivate e legittimate. La fonte più estesa che noi abbiamo su queste vicende è l'ampia sezione del quarto libro della geografia di Strabone, dedicata dichiaratamente, dice Strabone, alle Alpi e a coloro che la abitano. In realtà i popoli alpini vi vengono solo menzionati per lo più. Sui quei pochi che invece, è un discorso troppo lungo, ma perché su quelli Strabone aveva fonti autorevolissime, penso per esempio ai Salassi. Sui pochi popoli che invece sono fatti oggetto di maggiore attenzione, vengono fornite delle notizie che sono tutte circoscrivibili in un passato recente o recentissimo, che non si spinge oltre 50-60 anni prima della generazione di Strabone stesso. E queste notizie, il che ce ne rivela l'origine, sono tutte relative alla storia dei rapporti più o meno conflittuali che queste popolazioni hanno avuto con Roma e che sono stati definitivamente risolti con le campagne militari protratte fra il 33 e il 13 a.C., tra le quali appunto la più amplificata dalla propaganda di regime è la guerra retica del 16-15, perché è il lancio della costruzione della figura dei due principi della Domus Augusta, Druso e Tiberio. Le informazioni straboniane dunque derivano dai resoconti ufficiali di quelle guerre, ai quali si affiancarono da subito altre forme di celebrazione encomiastica, sia letterarie, pensate alle odi di Orazio, pensate alla Consolatio ad Liviam, dove noi abbiamo la prima menzione in assoluto del fiume Isarco, che chiaramente prima era escluso dall'orizzonte romano, ma anche celebrazioni monumentali, le più celebri dei quali sono le statue degli etne sconfitti che si trovavano nel Sebasteion di Afrodisia e che sono di età Claudia e che probabilmente riproducono un modello già presente a Roma, forse nella Porticus costruita da Agrippa. Ora, nessuna di queste fonti fa alcun accenno all'origine dei reti, si limita a collocarli in un determinato contesto strategico-geografico. In conclusione, finisco con un'ultima rapida annotazione proprio riguardo alla collocazione geografica dei reti di cui queste fonti trattano. Le operazioni militari del 15 a.C. risultano condotte pressoché esclusivamente contro i reti transalpini, a cui forse possiamo aggiungere alcuni gruppi stanziati nella parte più settentrionale del versante alpino italiano, ad esempio quelli che Strabone dice che erano minacciosamente insediati fin sopra Verona e Como. Si tratta nel complesso, in tutta evidenza, dell'area che sarebbe stata di lì a poco organizzata territorialmente e amministrativamente come provincia di Rhaetia. Quanto alla sola reticità che nei tempi precedenti era stata nota alla cultura greco-romana, e cioè la reticità atesina, quella di cui ha notizia Polibio, sia i dati archeologici, sia appunto le fonti storiografiche sembrano indicarcene l'esaurimento e la dissoluzione seguita all'avanzata dei processi di romanizzazione nella Valle dell'Adige. E sperando di essere rimasta nei tempi assegnati, vi ringrazio.
Grazie moltissimo Elvira per questa chiarificazione delle fonti. Sarà molto importante per una discussione sugli aspetti etici ed emici. Importante anche la chiarificazione di Tito Livio, che appunto è veneto, cioè, quindi è importante la visione dell'altro a partire dal punto di vista anche geografico e culturale. So thank you, Elvira, very much for this clearness in considering the ancient sources that will be very useful for a later discussion on the ethic and emic consideration on the definition of the Rhaetians, or as for many other peoples. Tu sarai presente alla discussione del pomeriggio, vero Elvira?
Spero di sì, io vi lascerò verso mezzogiorno perché ho chiesto un'ora alla mia commissione e spero di esaurire i lavori lì entro le 2:30. Voi vi ritrovate alle
2:30, perché
Perfetto.
Noi ora facciamo un break di un quarto d'ora.
Perfetto.
E quindi ci ritroviamo alle 11:35.
Benissimo.
Are there any flash questions to the contribution of Elvira Migliario?
Well, I would have one.
Please.
I asked it in English and in Italian, but I think it is rather clear. You made a point about the concept of civitas or civitas. As for the relevance of the group referring to some kind of a civic organization, well, this is interesting, but I only wanted to remind that the term civitas is the only one that is used in the Bello Gallico. All the Helvetia is divided in pagi and is a civitas, and you'd never find in the Bello Gallico for Caesar, tribe, or any other things. The only term used for all the groups of the Gallic people is civitas. So what do you think about this situation?
Well, as you know, the discussion about Gallic pagi and civitates is a long one. It is lasting since 19th century.
Yes, the point, sorry, excuse me, is that generally in the not so correct for me translations, these civitates become tribes. In the Italian translation or the British translation. Yes. This was the point, sorry.
This was the point, but we know that when Caesar started his Gallic wars, he had signed foedera with some of the Gallic tribes. And that is the point. You can't compare, one can't compare Caesar's Bellum Gallicum with Pliny, because Pliny is describing a word which is a Roman word and which is organized upon Roman institutions. So thank you for this opportunity to clarify my opinion, my point. But when Pliny writes about civitates, he is absolutely aware of what he is saying. So it is a different point of view from Caesar and 150 years later, Naturalis Historia and geographical and institutional description of the Roman world, which is an organized word. It is a word which stands upon strong institutions, and so it can be described. But the turning point, it is the La Turbie inscription.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you very much, Elvira. Are there any other flash questions? No? Then I propose to meet again at 11:40. So in 15 minutes, we are 10 minutes late, but I think it's good for the Italian times. So please, let's meet again in 10 minutes. We will broadcast again in Facebook. We invite the friends in the colleagues who are following on Facebook to log again in 15 minutes.